of impeachment. Dun, dun, dun. Y'all, poor Chuck Schumer. Poor Chuck. If Chuck Schumer were ever cast in a movie, it would have to be a Pulp Fiction remake, and he would be the Gimp, and Donald Trump would be his master. That was just embarrassing, y'all. I mean, really, it was genuinely embarrassing to see the United States Senate do what they did, and in large part, what they did was they caved. They didn't do what they said they were gonna do. It was bizarre. I mean, so they start it, and look, I said last week, it is good. It is definitionally a sham if they're not going to have witnesses. That's Chuck Schumer's. Those are his own words. Those are Chuck Schumer's own words, definitionally. An impeachment trial without witnesses is a sham. That is a direct quote from Chuck Schumer. And he's not talking about we all saw it, so we don't need to call him. No, he was talking about having a real trial in the Senate with actual witnesses who are deposed, who come in, who are cross-examined. That's what he said last year. And he said last year's impeachment trial was a sham because there were no witnesses. Guess what? There were no witnesses this time. Definitionally, this was a sham. What the Senate Democrats decided to do was a sham. Not only was it a sham, I mean, this is just Mitch McConnell. There are words I cannot say on this radio program, but y'all all know what I'm talking about. Mitch McConnell made Chuck Schumer his plaything. Donald Trump made Chuck Schumer his plaything. This was embarrassing. The man who said you got to have witnesses or it's a sham got the votes to have witnesses. This is the most amazing part of it. You know, so Saturday morning they have this vote. 55 members of the United States Senate decide that they will have they'll have witnesses. Now, you need to know something for context here. This is really important that you understand this. The Senate's not meeting this week. The Senate was never going to meet this week. The Senate is in recess this week. They're taking a break this week. They were going to take a break this week even if there was impeachment. They were going to take a break anyway. So they could have had witnesses and deposed them this week, and they could have continued the depositions in the next week, recessed the impeachment trial to depose and to confirm Biden cabinet nominees and to pass COVID relief. But no. They chose not to do that. No, what they chose to do was to bail on it altogether. The Senate Democrats, having gotten the historic vote, by the way, historic, even Lindsey Graham voted to have witnesses. Now, Graham voted to have witnesses because I think he presumed he would have a seat at the table in shaping those witnesses. But they vote to have witnesses, and I send out an alert. Well, I guess I'm going to have to take this seriously now. And then suddenly the next thing I'm reading is they're having the vote on impeachment. What? How is this? You decide to have the witnesses, and then you say, nope, our bad. We're going to go on and find him not guilty. He's found not guilty. Not guilty. Done. Not guilty. That's where we are here, ladies and gentlemen. The President of the United States is not guilty. The President of the United States is not convicted by the Senate. Yes, I told y'all last week. I told you last week this was going to happen. I gave you the headline last week as a breaking news item. President Trump not guilty. Not enough votes to convict him, but more votes to convict than any other president from his own party. I told you it was going to happen last week. That's why I didn't pay attention to it. It was not news. The only news would have been had they had witnesses. They voted to have witnesses, And then they decided not to have the witnesses, and they wrapped it up. The Democrats should be embarrassed. By the way, the Democratic base is furious. The Democratic base is furious with Chuck Schumer. They are livid with the Senate Democrats. They wanted the witnesses. They wanted this out there. They wanted them to take their time with it. They wanted a real trial. They wanted accountability. This is what you've heard the whole time. Accountability, accountability, accountability. We got to have accountability. Where's the accountability when you won't even have a trial? You know it's the only way they could have persuaded Republicans was to have witnesses, and they didn't want to persuade the Republicans. More Americans were paying attention to the snowstorm and the winter than they were impeachment. See, this is part of the problem here. Is the American media was obsessed with it. The Democrats were obsessed with it. Therefore, they assumed everyone else was obsessed with it. The Democrats and the media in their bubble are all talking about it. Therefore, they assumed everyone else was. But more Americans were paying attention to the snow. They were trying to watch something they were trying to figure out all these streaming services, trying to figure out what the hell is Peacock. They weren't interested in impeachment. If the Democrats wanted to get them interested in impeachment, they needed to give them a real show. And a real show was bring in the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, and have him testify under oath before the Senate. That would have gotten America to pay attention to what was going on. That would have broken through. And you have all these people, assuming they say what the Democrats thought they would say. What if they didn't? What if they didn't say what the Democrats wanted them to say? What if all of those statements made in the rush, we now know the Capitol Hill police officer who died did not die as first reported. What if there were other things that in the heat of the moment we got news in one way, and maybe it didn't turn out that way if the vice president actually testified under oath? Maybe if the vice president testified under oath, he would say that, yes, Donald Trump was collaborative in getting the National Guard there and wasn't hesitant. Because, you know, the current reports are they didn't speak for 6 hours or at all that day. And that Ivanka Trump had to be the mediator when they talked. What if that was different? We'll never know now. The Democrats and the media get to speculate. They get to perpetuate stories, some of which we now know aren't true, many of which are. And they never have to call the witnesses. They never have to push back on their own timelines. Nor do the Republican members of the Senate have to be confronted with anything of witnesses. The Republicans in the Senate do not have to be confronted with Vice President Pence telling them the president would not call out the National Guard. He had to intervene. The Republicans in the Senate, they don't have to hear about how Mike Pence really was in jeopardy from Mike Pence. They don't have to hear about how the president wouldn't take his phone call from Mike Pence. They don't have to hear any of that. Or the Democrats don't have to hear that's not true. That we can just move on. This was a sham impeachment. Now, here's the thing. You're going to read a lot of pieces. You're going to hear a lot of statements. You're going to have people with epistemic certainty tell you the Republican Party will never get past this. That they're too broken now. That there's not enough. There's a problem for the GOP. Here's Jeff Flake.
Moderate Republicans, as you just heard Senator Cassidy there, insist that the party is ready to move on from Trump. So why isn't that actually happening?
Well, I'm with Cassidy. It simply has to. We have no choice. We're headed down a demographic cul-de-sac if we don't. If you look at what's happened since President Trump was elected, we lost the White House, we lost the House, we lost the Senate, we lost more than 400 legislative seats nationwide. So there's really no future with Trumpism. So we've got to move on. It's difficult because the president's base is still there, but we have to move on.
And what if you don't? What if it just is the party of Trump?
Well, we'll just continue to lose seats. We'll continue to be, frankly, in a permanent minority if we continue this. So we have to, and we should want to as well. I mean, look at what has happened since the last election. The president lost the election, then used every lever at his disposal to hang on to that, to hang on to the White House. And we saw what resulted on January 6th.
Notice his 400 seats. That's a clever talking point from Jeff Flake. Charlie actually pointed out to me this morning, where's this coming from? And I have had to look, and it appears that he is recounting 400 seats lost in the last 4 years, not in the last election, in the last 4 years, 400 Republican seats lost. What he's not counting then are the offsetting pickups this past year. So he's not counting the Republican gains in 2020, some of which negated the losses in 2018. I mean, the Republicans lost some seats in 2018 and picked them right back up in 2020. So he's not doing that. And then there are the state legislative races. The Republicans getting the Minnesota State Senate, Republicans securing the complete Arizona legislature, Republicans picking up all of New Hampshire. They wound up not picking up the state house in Alaska that they didn't hold. But they picked up a lot of legislative seats, and Jeff Flake's ignoring those. Here's the problem for all the people in the media bubble about Donald Trump. If you're actually honest about the situation with Donald Trump, you have to acknowledge that there are parts of the country where Donald Trump underperformed other Republicans. Here in Georgia, that's a good example. There wasn't fraud, there wasn't theft. Donald Trump underperformed. But then there are other states where Donald Trump overperformed. Donald Trump outperformed in some of the upper Midwest states, the Republicans there. In some southern states, Donald Trump overperformed. He outpaced other Republicans. So in other words, the Republican Party is actually a fairly big tent, and each side just has to figure out how to live within that tent together moving forward. Each side has to be able to figure out how do you accommodate each other. Georgia is indicative of this. In Georgia, the Republicans are going to have to figure out how do we as an entity coexist with each other when we may not particularly care for each other. How do we coexist? Because in Georgia, the Republicans lost 2 U.S. Senate seats because in the general, people who didn't like Donald Trump voted Democrat, and in the runoff, those people came back by about 6 percentage points to the GOP, but then Trump voters by over 400,000 stayed home. So how do you get them all headed in the right direction? How do you get them all to rally around a particular candidate? This is going to be what the GOP has to deal with, and it may cause them to lose in the next few years, but that's not the obituary of the GOP. That's the sorting out of the GOP while they wander the wilderness for a few years. The Democrats went through something similar. No one wanted to write the obituary of the Democratic Party. They always want to write the obituary of the Republican Party. The Republican Party's obituary is written every 2 years in elections, even when they win. There's always a yes, but column. And it's taken as conventional wisdom by the media. But here's the thing. Ultimately, the bottom line is the GOP is going to move forward and have to figure out a way to reconcile Trump voters and non-Trump voters of the GOP. They actually did very well in 2020, other than the presidency. The president then cost them 2 seats in Georgia, costing them control of the Senate. But the House, they came very close to picking it up. They picked up state legislative seats. They will run the table on redistricting. They will win in 2022. And the obituary of the Republican Party is always written and never realized. But in the Senate has revealed itself with the Democrats to still be run by Mitch McConnell. And for the GOP, particularly as the Democrats are rattling about gun control and the like, that's a good thing. We still got protections in the Senate.
You can follow Erick around social media at
It is Erick Erickson here. The number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Glad to have you with me. Let's go to the phones all the way down to Valdosta. Theo, welcome.
Hey, how you doing, Eric?
Good, how are you?
Listen, I have a quick question for you. How can Mitch McConnell think that doing away with Trump and his voters is going to win him anything in 2022?
I don't know that he does. I realize that the media is characterizing it that way. And I think that Mitch McConnell himself doesn't like Donald Trump. But I also think that Mitch McConnell realizes the GOP can't survive without Trump's voters. And he's got to figure out a way to navigate that. And if anything, I think his thinking is happening in real time, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, I don't understand how a lot of these Republicans, especially some of the never Trump, like Liz Cheney, that kind of thing, I don't know, or even our Lieutenant Governor Duncan, who goes on CNN but doesn't speak to conservatives down here, thinks that he's going to be able to survive in 2022. I mean, can you elaborate what their thinking is?
Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that they know. I can tell you, if I had to speculate, it's this, and it is that when they look at their interpretation of events, if we wanted to look at it from their perspective, is this: that the Republicans had an opportunity to keep the Senate in January and preserve Donald Trump's legacy. And you had the vice president and the president come down and say, you got to turn out, you got to help, you got to save the legacy. You had the president's kids do the same. And 400,000 plus of those voters chose not to for one reason or another. Mm-hmm. And so I think you've got some Republicans, I think they're wrong, but I do think that you have some Republicans who are thinking, we can't depend on Trump voters moving forward. They'll only show up if Donald Trump is on the ballot. So how do we build a new coalition if they won't turn out? And frankly, I think they need to understand that Trump voters will turn out if you give them a reason. I also think that a lot of Trump voters have to emphasize the fact that we want to turn out and vote for people other than Donald Trump. And both sides need to – it's almost like they need a marriage counselor to a degree. Because you got some who think these guys hate us, and then you've got them thinking, well, they hate us. And you need to actually get them together and say, listen, we can beat Stacey Abrams if we work together. Let's find a way to work together. And both sides are going to have to compromise. That's my sense of it, because I do spend a lot of time talking to a lot of people, and I really do think in Atlanta with the Republicans, some of them think these guys, they're never going to turn out for us. They only turn out for Donald Trump. And they look at January as proof. Well, they're wrong. I think they're wrong. You know they're wrong. So how do we get them to figure that out? I'm not sure. I'm afraid, though, if we go through a system of brutal primaries and spend all of our money, Stacey Abrams is going to win.
Right, I think so too. And my favorite candidate was Nikki Haley.
Yeah,
and I can't vote for her now. I can't.
I'm getting that from a lot of people.
I mean, I liked her. I thought this is somebody that represents the party that I think will do well, and I can't vote for her now. I just can't. I wouldn't ever vote for Ben Sass, that's for sure. I would vote for the Democrat before I would vote for Ben Sass.
Yeah, look.
I can't. Nikki Haley was my favorite.
All I can say is that, I actually want to spend some time talking about this when we come back. So stick around here, Theo. I got to let you go there because we've got a hard break. Thank you very much. There's got to be some level of grace here as well. I'm getting that from a lot of people who liked Haley are very disappointed by what looks like opportunism as she tries to navigate that the party needs to move on from Donald Trump and then going the other direction. She's a personal friend of mine, as is Ben Sass. This is kind of funny. A lot of these guys, Ted Cruz is a personal friend. Tom Cotton is as well. All of these people are friends of mine trying to navigate their path forward. They're coming to different conclusions as to how to do it. I'm just sitting back thinking, man, I'm glad I'm behind a microphone and not having to sort this mess out myself. Hello there. It is Erick Erickson here. The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Let's go back to the phones. David calling from Dalton. You're going to be next. Welcome.
I'm really curious. What do you think that Schumer and the Democratic House managers are telling a constituent that may confront them as to why they didn't call witnesses? But more important for me, what is the real answer? I want the answer they're giving out, in your opinion. But what if I threw those people in a room of truth and shot them up full of truth serum? What is the real answer that they did not call witnesses compared to what they're telling their constituents? And that, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what they're telling their constituents is that they needed to move on and that they decided that there was no way to persuade Republicans. I think the real answer is that in part, that yes, they do want to move on, and they would get bogged down and it would drag out. I do think there's some legitimacy to that. But I actually think that the real answer is that if they had witnesses and the Republicans were allowed to have witnesses as well, that it would become more complex. That the president clearly did, and I listen, I know some of you disagree with this, but the president clearly did tell the crowd to march to the Capitol. He did that in his speech. Those are his words, to walk up to the Capitol. He wanted them in his speech to be peaceful, but to walk up to the Capitol. There is evidence that the QAnon Proud Boy people were planning this in advance. And there would be tough questions for whether or not the Capitol Police were told to stand down, whether or not members of the Capitol Police collaborated, whether or not members of Congress collaborated. There would be tough questions that could potentially undermine the whole institution. And so they chose to move on. So what I think they're going to wind up doing is they're not going to dodge those questions. You're probably going to see a bipartisan commission put forward to investigate what happened. And they may very well use those findings then to prosecute the president or go after him with civil liability, depending on the findings. But they are a lot of tough questions. And it was very clear that if they gave in on witnesses, this would go a lot longer than what any of them wanted, because they got so much stuff they want to do. So there's a little bit of truth and then a whole lot of obfuscation in what they're doing. My personal view is that if you really believe the President of the United States caused an insurrection and an attack on the first branch of government, then you have an obligation as the Congress in an impeachment trial to call all the witnesses and build the case against him. And they chose not to, which is a pretty damning indictment on the Democrats' complaints. I mean, the Republicans have a great message going forward on this. That if the Democrats really believe the president did this, they voted to call witnesses and then chose not to, because they would rather the political issue than to actual find a resolution to it. Back to the phones we go. Larry, you're going to be next. Welcome.
Hey, Eric. I got a question for you in terms of trying to fix the Republican Party here in Georgia. I'm very concerned that Stacey Abrams is going to sneak into the governor's house if we don't do this right. I've talked to a lot of my friends down here in Warner Robins, and what they're thinking is we need to have an investigation into the election process, not that it's going to change anything, but so we don't do it wrong the next time. I would just like your feelings on it, because, probably not enough fraud to cause a change in the result, but definitely fraud, and we need to get serious about holding people accountable for that.
Yeah, look, I think that's a great point. We've got to figure out exactly what it was that allowed the Democrats to do a lot of what they did. I don't think it was fraud. What I do think is there was a lot of Republican complacency that they just assumed they were inevitable and that the Democrats couldn't stop them. I frankly think we need a larger investigation into what did the Republican Party itself do or not do. And that's something that's got to come from our elected Republican leaders because, I mean, you know, Stacey Abrams wrote that piece in the New York Times on Friday kind of outlining how you move your state and how you get your state to turn blue. And it was the playbook that the Republicans used in the 1990s to turn the South red. That's all Stacey Abrams did is she changed the talking points to persuade people to the Democrats. It's something the Republicans can do. But they chose in Georgia not really to do a lot of the things they could have done. You got to look at that as well. But then the bigger issue is the outside groups, the coordination of outside groups. How did the Democrats use outside groups to raise money and do door knocking? And did they in some way, although they're nonpartisan groups, these outside groups, did they target Democrats? Because that's what a lot of them do is you have these outside groups that come in. They're 501c3, so they can't play politics. They say, well, we're just doing voter education. And then they conveniently ignore all the Republicans. The Republicans can do the same thing. But again, they didn't do that in Georgia, which is one of the frustrating things. So, yeah, Larry, I think we've got to do this. The problem is a lot of what happened, and I hope people will take this as truth, because it is. A lot of what happened in Georgia was not fraud at the electoral level. A lot of what happened in Georgia was the Republican Party not performing the way it needed to perform. The Republican Party in Georgia could have done what the Democrats were doing and chose not to. And we've got to have an accounting within the Republican Party in Georgia, not a Brad Raffensperger accountability issue. It's got to be a David Schaefer accountability issue, because the GOP dropped the ball in Georgia unquestionably. The House and the Senate, and just for those of you saying, well, we did great in the House and the Senate, but the House and the Senate, they started their own campaign groups. The Georgia House and the Georgia Senate, they ran their own outside operations, so they didn't have to rely on the GOP. I mean, that's for those of you who are in the Republican Party, you need to be mindful of this, because it's true that the Georgia House and the Georgia Senate set up their own outside campaign groups so that they didn't have to rely on the Georgia GOP. Why is it that the Georgia Republicans don't want to rely on the Georgia GOP? Get an answer to that question, you go a long way towards figuring out how we can do things better moving forward. I want to get to an earlier point, though, had a caller from Valdosta who said, "Yo, I'm so bad with names." Was it Theo? I'm sorry. I'm terribly bad with names. I can remember faces and never remember names, but nonetheless, about Nikki Haley, and he loved Nikki Haley and can't vote for her moving forward, given her antagonism towards the president. The Tim Alberta piece, I think, inside the Beltway in particular, hurts her. If you're not familiar with the piece, essentially Nikki Haley was ready to part ways with Donald Trump and did so to Tim Alberta. And then when it was very clear that he was going nowhere and maybe reasserting himself, she kind of backed down on that. And it is read in Washington, among other places, as rank opportunism. Here's the thing. One of the things I see that is most troubling to me about the future of the Republican Party moving forward is we are in a discombobulated time. Most everyone expected Donald Trump to lose in 2016, including a lot of the president's supporters, other than his core base. The base was convinced of it, and they were proven right. And because they were proven right, they've decided that they know everything and everybody else knows nothing. Which is one reason, again, why they are so convinced it had to be vote fraud this time, because they were right in 2016, and so they're obviously right now, and everybody else is wrong. There's a lack of trust and a lack of faith in institutions. A lot of Republican politicians concurrently are trying to figure out how do we go forward with something like this. We've never seen something like this in our lifetimes or the lifetimes of our parents. This sort of political populist movement, how do we navigate it? And people are arriving at different conclusions. And in arriving at different conclusions, they are mad at each other for not arriving at the same conclusion. Take Ben Sasse. Ben Sasse is inarguably a conservative. He's not the fighter conservatives wanted. He is an intellectual. He is a talker. He thinks. He says things a lot of people agree with, but people don't like him because he's not the partisan warrior. Ben Sasse got a lot of heat from a lot of Democrats because they knew he didn't agree with a lot of the Trump agenda, but he kept his mouth shut. And he arguably cast a couple of votes that he didn't really like, but felt he had to win re-election. And then once he won re-election, he was willing to be more open about the president. In fact, Ben Sasse did better in Nebraska than the president. He won areas of the state. Ben Sasse won every area of the state. Donald Trump didn't do that. He lost the urban, suburban areas of Lincoln and Omaha. Ben Sasse won them. And then Sasse started being openly critical again. Now he's got 6 years. And so a lot of people are like, oh, well, it was just cynical. You weren't willing to die on your sword. Here's the thing. I want everyone to pay attention to this point, please. There are a lot of people who don't like Donald Trump, who consider themselves part of the right, who want Joan of Arc to run for office. They want a martyr. They want Nikki Haley to just come out and say what they know she believes and stop him in and hawing. They want Marco Rubio to pick a side. They want Ben Sasse to run for president as the guy who tells you like it is, even if they know he's not going to win. I think Tim Alberta and Matt Lewis, both of whom I know, respect, and like. I know Matt much better than Tim, but I think they're kind of in the as political writers in this vein of they want Joan of Arc. They want the person who's willing to tell you the tough truth and potentially martyr themselves. They're disappointed in those who try to navigate Trump too clever by half. And a lot of people don't want to show any grace. I saw Matt this weekend talking about how do you and who do you show grace to? And this is a conversation that we're going to have as a party moving forward. But the bottom line is that Joan of Arc can't win because ashes do not get votes. And those who want someone to be the martyr, that's fine. It may make you feel better to tell those painful truths, but the martyr gets to be a pile of ashes, doesn't get to hold office. So how do you find someone who can thread the needle? And part of that is you're going to have to be willing to accept that we are navigating through uncharted times in uncharted politics, and nobody really knows what the hell they're doing. What they know is they got to get 50+1, and that requires sometimes saying and doing things you wish they wouldn't do because you think there should be politicians better than that, but they are politicians. Politics. Poly meaning many, ticks meaning blood-sucking creatures. This is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a group of sinners who want power. And that's the reality of politics. And the more grace we can show to those who try to build a coalition, maybe not in the way we want, who are not the honest, virtuous martyrs that we prefer, well, the honest, virtuous person, the Ben Sasse of the world is not going to get elected. Ben Sasse is a guy who I know him, I like him, I consider him a friend in politics. We're not on a daily basis talking to each other, unlike some of his colleagues and mine. But I know the guy, I like the guy. I can send him an email, I can get a response. I know he's been praying for my family. I've been praying for his family. He's a guy who I would like to see a guy like that run for president just because he's an ideas guy. I know he wouldn't win, but he's an ideas guy, and the Republican Party needs ideas beyond the politics personality. Or there's a guy like Tim Scott from South Carolina who he's probably not going to run for president because he's too nice a guy and isn't willing to do the dirty deeds that must be done now in politics to get elected. Politics is too nasty for too many people, and I get that. I get that. All I can say is whether you're talking about a Nikki Haley or a Marco Rubio or a Ben Sass or a Mike Pence or a Ted Cruz or a Tom Cotton or a Rand Paul or a Ron DeSantis or a Brian Kemp or whoever. We are in uncharted political territory. People, all of them are trying to figure out a path forward. All of them would like a job opportunity moving forward in politics. And we've got to be willing to show some grace to people who we know deep down, they're all on our side intellectually, positionally. We may just not like their style, and that will preclude them ultimately. But there's got to be some grace for these people who, I mean, even a guy like Ben Sass, who a lot of Trump voters hate, but he's still largely on their side on issues. There's got to be a place for him in the party. There's got to be a place for Nikki Haley in the party. That may not be the presidency, but there's got to be a place. And instead of the I'm so disappointed in this person media that we're getting, maybe instead recognize that everybody is trying to find their way, moving chess pieces on a board to get the Republican nomination in 2024 or whatever they want. And if you kind of know that this person believes what they believe and they're trying to build a coalition, sometimes you got to show them some grace to let them try to build that coalition, knowing they may not. They may not. But I would rather they try to find a way to bring together the pieces of the party than see it all break apart and keep the Democrats in office. We are the Republicans, the conservatives, the right of center coalition. I think we're right overwhelmingly. And I think we're pretty diverse. I think there's more intellectual diversity on our side. But we got to accommodate each other, or this left-wing cancel culture machine is going to steamroll all of us.
And well respected. It's Erick Erickson.
The phone number is 877-97-ERIC, 877-973-7425. Well, it was only a matter of time. The Democrats are pushing for Homeland Security to delve into domestic terrorism.